Welcome, everybody. This week's Joy of Gratitude is sponsored in memory of Gutta Bracha, Bas Menachem Mendel, and Chana Zalda. So following on from last week's Joy of Gratitude, I had my vaccine last Thursday. And of course, I am grateful to the medical staff and even to the government officials who decided to make Israel the first to vaccinate en masse and paid double the price to ensure it. And to those who put the study in to create such an amazing thing. And of course, as we said, overriding everything to Hashem, who directs and creates everything in this world. So today I'd like to focus on the Torah reading of the next few weeks. We've just started talking about, we're going to be starting this week talking about our slavery in Egypt and the eventual Exodus. And we find a truly fascinating concept that runs through the whole of the Exodus story. Pharaoh, this great Pharaoh, the supreme ruler of the greatest superpower of the known world. In Egyptian mythology, Pharaoh was even viewed as a physical embodiment of the god of the sky. And it's very interesting. This tremendous god, this Pharaoh, we see that Hashem tells Moshe a couple of times to go and meet Pharaoh, not in his palace, but instead by the Nile, by the water. And the Midrash explains that because Pharaoh was so intent on showing everybody that he was a god, that obviously as a god, he wouldn't need to go to the bathroom. And therefore, Pharaoh kept himself in all day. And there was one moment in the day where he had an opportunity to relieve himself. And that was when he told the people of Egypt that there's a certain time in the morning where he, the embodiment of the sky, the embodiment of the god of the sky, needs to go and have a conference with the god of the Nile. At that point, nobody else is allowed out. It's just me and the god of the Nile. We're going to speak together. And of course, Pharaoh used that particular opportunity to relieve himself. So therefore, Hashem says to Moshe, go meet Pharaoh at that one time when he's going out to the Nile. Catch him at that moment. He's going to have to keep himself in for an extra whole day. Now, bearing in mind this self-importance that Pharaoh has, this sort of godlike persona that he's trying to portray, we would expect that he would never admit that there's something he doesn't know. And yet there's two occasions that we see Pharaoh, it's not the same Pharaoh, but we see two occasions where Pharaoh admits he doesn't know something. He says, I don't know that. What's the first time? Well, in this week's parasha, in Parashat Shemot, we're told a new king arose over Egypt who did not know about Yosef. Now, just stop for a minute. We are talking one generation later. Joseph died at the age of 110. And not too long after that were the Jewish people put into slavery. We're not talking about that long after Joseph has died, a generation afterwards. We've got to understand what Joseph did for Egypt. He changed the whole dynamics of the country. He made Egypt into a world power because all the nations around had to come to Egypt and sell all their riches for the grain that Joseph had stored. He made Pharaoh the ruler and owner of all the people in Egypt because people were so desperate for food that Joseph took them into slavery to Pharaoh in order to give them food. How could he not know about Joseph? And I'm sure the walls were covered with hieroglyphics of this amazing man who saved the country. How did he not know? And secondly, many years later, Pharaoh, the successor of the previous Pharaoh. When Moshe arrives and says a message from Hashem, a message from God, let my people go, Pharaoh says, who is this Hashem? Who is this God? I've never heard of him. Now, if we stop for a minute just to think, how can we have a situation where there is a God, Pharaoh thinks he's a God, where there's a God and he doesn't know all the other gods in the pantheon? How is it possible? Oh, I never met him. Oh, I didn't know about him. How embarrassing. How embarrassing for a God to admit that he doesn't know about another God. The answer should be obvious. In each case, acknowledging Yosef and acknowledging Hashem would have required him to admit that he was dependent on something or someone else. A person who gave him the overarching power that made the country so important, that's Joseph, and a God who's in charge of everything, a God who is the only real power. That he couldn't do. And in contrast to Pharaoh's behavior, we see Moshe, the leader of the Jewish people, take the complete opposite approach to an extreme. The first two plagues, his brother Aaron hits the water for the blood and the frogs. Why? Our sages tell us, because the water saved him as a baby, and it would have been a rejection of the kindness that the water gave him to hit the water. The third plague, his brother Aaron hits the ground and the dust turns into lice. Why isn't it Moshe who hits the ground? The sages tell us, because the ground helped him. When he killed the Egyptian, he hid the Egyptian in the ground. And therefore, it would have been a rejection of the kindness that the ground gave him. I don't get it. The water and the ground, they're inanimate objects. Do you think they care? Do you think they know? And even more, the Torah tells us that if we have some meat that isn't kosher, do you know who we should give it to? We should give it to the dogs. And why? The sages tell us, because in Egypt, during the final plague where the firstborn of the Egyptians passed away, it says, no dog barked in the neighborhood of the Jewish people, in the neighborhood of the Israelites, because no Israelite died. Were the dogs thinking? No, dogs bark when there's death. In this neighborhood, there was no death, therefore they didn't bark. And yet, as a reward to show our gratitude to these dogs, we give them any meat that we can't eat ourselves. Fascinating. Does the dog know what's going on? And even if you were to say that dogs do have an appreciation, do you think this dog, a descendant of a previous, we're talking about centuries later, and I'm still supposed to be giving meat to a dog? What's it all about? And the answer is extremely simple. Extremely simple. You're right. The water doesn't know what's going on. The dust of the earth doesn't know what's going on. Even the dogs have got no idea what's going on. It's not about them. It's about us. In order for us to develop this concept of appreciation, Hashem tells us or gives us this guideline. Even inanimate objects work on developing that feeling, and then it will help with everything else. And it's crucial now in the Exodus story, because it's what distinguishes us from the Egyptians. It's what distinguishes us from Pharaoh. It's the birth of our nation, and this is what we're all about. It's what prepares us to appreciating that Hashem gives us everything, and therefore it's what prepares us to become the chosen people. So how can we apply this concept? Well, I'll give a simple suggestion. Think of one inanimate object that has helped you in the last year. And every time you go past it, have a feeling of gratitude. I'll give you an example of my one. I've been praying for almost a year now outside in the neighborhood, in the neighboring garden. There is a massive carob tree there. During the summer, it gave me shade while I was praying. Now, every time I see this carob tree, I have a feeling. Thank you. Yes, I know that the carob tree doesn't feel anything. I know that. But I'm working that muscle. I'm working that muscle of appreciation. And what does it mean practically? It means practically I won't kick it. Practically I won't break a branch off it. Does the tree care? No. But it's about me. It's about developing my sense of appreciation. So find something in your life and do that. And at a very, very minimum, the thing that we can walk away with is this following concept, that if we're supposed to have some level of hakarat hatov, of gratitude towards even inanimate objects, then of course we should be feeling that way towards people. Thanks for joining us. I look forward to seeing you all next week.